Hello. Today I'd like to speak to you about John Steinbeck's The Snake, to discuss the sources of the story as well as Steinbeck's writing process. Writers are not like most people. They observe and record what they see and hear, and then they process that raw material through their imaginations, through their bright hopes and dark fears, to create fiction. Writers take the stuff of life as their source and transform it into something completely new. John Steinbeck was a writer who transformed the people he knew into characters, the places he knew into settings, and the events he witnessed through his own struggling creativity into the plots of the stories that we are discussing today. Of course, we're in this beautiful place today because John Steinbeck lived and wrote here. Although Cannery Row is very different now than it was in 1934, and wouldn't he be amazed? It doesn't require much of an imagination to see Steinbeck walking past the Wing Chong market on his way to the lab, and as I can tell you, walking up those wooden steps into the Pacific Biological Laboratories. It's not hard to imagine Ed and John conversing inside, cold beer in hand. Clearly, the years 1933 and 1934 were seminal for John Steinbeck. He was living with Carol in his father's cottage in Pacific Grove. They were desperately poor, classic starving artist. It was at this time that he wrote nearly all the stories of the Long Valley, anticipating the themes and settings he would later develop into his most important works. The story The Snake, my subject for today, has for its main character a marine biologist modeled after Ed Ricketts. This is the first of many characters that are in some way based on his friend Ed. Many of these short stories were drafted in manuscripts, contained in hardbound ledger notebooks, like the one you're looking at on the slide. This is one of the two housed at San Jose State University's Martha Heasley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies. The inside cover of the ledger book containing The Snake features some fancy brushwork. As you can see on this slide, it states that the book was marvelously revived for this purpose. And the facing page features a handwritten table of contents. Before each story, Steinbeck wrote journal pages and personal notes. He would converse and even argue with himself. In these pages, he wrote commentaries on stories recently written. He agonized over his struggles with loneliness and self-doubt, and even engaged in small talk. In the notes before The Snake, for example, Steinbeck even wrote about the ink he was using. He had been watering the ink down and wondered if so doing would affect its drying. These were private notes and never intended for public view. Because of this, these journals provide a valuable window, not only into his state of mind, but his writing process as well. The Snake was written in the summer of 1934, and it was first published in June of 1935. It was published in an issue of the Monterey Beacon. The Monterey Beacon was a small, experimental literary magazine run surprisingly in conjunction with horse stables. In fact, as payment for his story, Steinbeck received 6 months' use of a steeplechase horse named Cochise. The editor of the Monterey Beacon even noted this horse trade at the head of the story. In his letter of July 30th, 1935, to Mavis McIntosh, Steinbeck notified his agent about the deal and offered her, quote, 10% of 6 months' writing. I don't know if she ever claimed it. In February of 1938, Esquire published the story under the title A Snake of One's Own, preserving for the most part the text of the earlier publication. Later that same year, Viking published its most popular version under its original title, In the Long Valley. The plot of The Snake remains notably constant throughout its composition and publication. The Snake, for the most part, follows Steinbeck's account of the incident, as he relates in his essay about Ed Ricketts. Steinbeck stated, "Mysteries were constant at the laboratory. A thing happened one night, which I later used as a short story. I wrote it just as it happened. I don't know what it means, and do not even answer the letters asking what its philosophic intent is. It just happened. Very briefly, this is the incident. A woman came in one night wanting to buy a rattlesnake. It happened we had one, and knew it because it had recently copulated with another snake in the cage. The woman paid for the snake and then insisted that it be fed. She paid for a white rat to be given it. Ed put the rat in the cage. The snake struck and killed it and then unhinged its jaws preparatory to swallowing it. The frightening thing was that the woman, who had watched the process closely, moved her jaws and stretched her mouth just as the snake was doing. After the rat was swallowed, she paid for a year's supply of rats and said she would come back. But she never did come back. What happened or why, I have no idea. Whether the woman was driven by a sexual, a religious, or a zoophilic impulse, or a gustatory impulse, we could never figure. The protagonist of The Snake is a young Dr. Phillips, who has the mild, preoccupied eyes of one who looks through a microscope a great deal. He returns to his little commercial laboratory on Cannery Street of Monterey after a day of collecting the starfish. While he is busily engaged in two types of activity, preparing dead specimens, the cat and starfish zygotes, and feeding live ones, including himself, he is interrupted by a knock at the door. A mysterious, tall woman with black eyes and a soft, throaty voice enters. She sits motionless while the doctor continues his scientific procedures. Her apparent lack of interest irritates him, and he attempts to shock her into attention by allowing her to watch as he slits the dead cat's throat and drains its blood. This has no effect on the woman, who calmly asks to purchase a male rattlesnake. She demands that he feed the snake, compelling the now frightened and confused doctor to place a white rat into the snake's feeding cage. The woman dispassionately watches the kill, while the scientist, his veins throbbing, says, "It's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's the most terrible thing in the world." He glances at the entranced woman and sees that she is weaving like the attacking snake. Not much, just a suggestion. After the snake's jaws completely engulf the rat, the now relaxed woman leaves the emotionally exhausted doctor to comb out his thoughts and try to make sense out of his irrational terror. He is unable to do this, however, for all theories about psychological sex symbols do not seem adequate. He never sees the woman again. There's a second account of the incident, which is the source for the story. It can be found in Martha Heasley Cox's interview with Webster F. Street, who was present in Ricketts' laboratory on that day. According to Street, the strange woman was just a girl on the circuit who took a fancy to Ed. Like the character of Steinbeck's story, this girl watched in fascination as the snake devoured the white rat. But unlike the fictional woman, she did not purchase the snake or the rat. Significantly, in Street's account, it was the scientist and not the woman who decided to feed the snake. In a 1993 recorded interview with Michael Hemp, the writer and philosopher Joseph Campbell also described the incident, but in a much more lighthearted way. One day, Ricketts invites us down to see the rattlesnake, puts this little white rat or mouse, I don't know which it was, and the languid snake into the other box with the snake in it. The cover on the top of it, wire, and the little mouse gets in there, and then there's John standing around feeling deep about it. And the little mouse starts sniffing along the length of the rattlesnake, and then suddenly seemed to have gotten the idea that this wasn't a good place to be, and went over there. The rattlesnake looks over and starts to move, comes over in his direction, and then, like that, hits him right there. 2 little red spots, and the little mouse just spins around, and then came the next thing. First, you're on the little mouse's side, you know. Now the mouse is dead, so you're on the rattlesnake's side. He's going to eat the thing. The rat was bigger around than the rattlesnake. But Ed said, now watch him. He's going to unhook his jaw. So we watched him unhook his jaw, and he comes in and begins taking this thing in. And Ed said, now see, he's being digested right there. The saliva can digest him. And he said, he's changing the shape inside there. The most absurd moment was when all there was left was 2 legs and a tail sticking out. The rattlesnake got a little tired at that point and just rested a little while, and then finally took it all in. This comes out as one of Steinbeck's stories, The Snake. Campbell's account includes no mention of a woman who wished to see the snake eat a rat. However, he does corroborate with that Ricketts, as in Street's account, initiated the feeding, and explained it to the observers as it proceeded. Perhaps the most significant detail in Campbell's account is the image of John Steinbeck, quote, standing around and feeling deep about it, while the others were humorously rooting for the mouse or rat and then for the snake. There is, however, no sense of horror or mystery in Campbell's memory of this absurd incident. In a 1987 letter to Michael Hemp, Grove Day, Steinbeck historian and friend, described the incident in this way. His, that is Ed's father, had caught a rattlesnake on the golf course and put it in a cage. A young lady with us was handling a white mouse and dropped it. Somebody suggested that we feed it to the snake, which had not eaten since captivity. The snake enjoyed its lunch, eating the mouse head first. Toward the end, the tail made the snake look as if it were smoking a cigarette. John made a Freudian story out of the incident, changing everything around. Several times in About Ed Ricketts, Steinbeck insisted that he wrote the story just as it happened. But clearly, as Grove Day said, he changed everything around. The story he told in The Snake differs significantly in both detail and mood from these eyewitness accounts. Although the textual variants between the 3 published versions are almost certainly accidental, Many substantive variants are apparent between any of these published texts and the handwritten manuscript. A careful analysis of the textual variance between the version published in the Long Valley and the handwritten text located at the Steinbeck Research Center at San Jose State University reveals Steinbeck's writing process, transforming source materials into the unique product of his individual creativity. The incident, as described in the ledger book working notes preceding the draft of the snake, unlike the more matter-of-fact accounts of Webster Street, Joseph Campbell, and Grove Day, became something deeply mysterious in Steinbeck's mind. In these working notes, Steinbeck wrote, "The story of the snake must be written. I don't know what it means, but it means something very terrible to my unconscious, and I'll write it slowly out of my unconscious. It's a terrible story, a damnable story, and I don't know what it means. I don't know. I'll write the frightful thing, though. Carol disapproves of it on the grounds that it is horror for its own sake. I don't think that is the case at all. And it does have to be written. It would eat me up otherwise." The most significant substantive variance between the manuscript and the published versions deal with the development of the scientist and woman's characters, and the psychologically devastating effect on the doctor of their momentary encounter. The changes from the manuscript to the published text show the doctor to be a logician who loses his scientific aloofness when he is confronted with the unreasoning and demonic vitality of the woman. In the earlier part of the story, Steinbeck carefully deleted from the final text emotionally charged phrases describing the doctor's actions. For example, the young man was interrupted by a knock on the door. His reaction in both the manuscript and published versions was a grimace of annoyance. But in the manuscript, the young man walked to the door and threw it open. In the published text, this act is not so violent or emotional. He simply goes to open the door. In both the manuscript and the Long Valley, there is much evidence of the doctor's unemotional, objective manner before the woman arrives. He simultaneously feeds and strokes the cats while calmly gassing one of them in the killing chamber. Steinbeck removed all emotional references from the published versions when describing the scientist's quarters. In the manuscript, the laboratory white light was a painful white light, but it becomes, in the published text, a more neutral, pouring white light. With the introduction of the woman, however, the scientist begins to lose his objectivity and become more emotional, a movement clearly seen in Steinbeck's revisions. In the manuscript, Dr. Phillips felt it was wrong to do the thing, but he didn't know why. In the revised text, however, Steinbeck introduced the subjective element of guilt and sin into the doctor's consciousness. He felt it was profoundly wrong to put a rat into the cage, deeply sinful, and he didn't know why. The dark and irrational presence of the woman causes him to become more fearful. In response to his growing fear, Dr. Phillips attempts to form a logical explanation to conceal his terror. The manuscript states, "The doctor tried to explain himself out of it. Lots of people have dreams about the terror of snakes making the kill. I think it is because it is a subjective rat. The rat is a persona. Once you see this through, the rat is only a rat, and you are free from the terror." In the published text, Steinbeck revises the words of the young man by stating, "Once you see the whole matter is objective. The rat is only a rat, and the terror is removed. With this revision, Steinbeck is intensifying the attempt by Dr. Phillips to rationalize what is taking place, and therefore concealing his irrational core of fear. Steinbeck emphasizes the doctor's fall from objectivity into irrational fear through other revisions of the handwritten text. In the manuscript, he wrote, "It is the most beautiful thing in the world," the young man cried. His veins were throbbing. In the published text, the added words, "It's the most terrible thing in the world," bring an even greater passion to the scientist's formerly objective perception. Unlike Dr. Phillips, the woman remains consistently two-dimensional throughout the story. All revisions from the manuscript to the published text strengthen her symbolic force by depersonalizing and flattening her character. The woman seems sensually motivated in Steinbeck's handwritten text. But in the published version, the key descriptive words emphasizing her sexual intensity were consistently deleted. In the manuscript, for example, her eyes glittered with control excitement. But in the published version, her eyes simply glittered in the strong light. Later in the manuscript, Steinbeck used the adjective feverish to describe her eyes, but this is conspicuously absent in the finished text. Steinbeck's description of her make her less a well-rounded character and more of a faceless mystery. Her presence in the story represents the contradiction that exists within Dr. Phillips, between his logical function as a scientist and his emotional, poetic function as a human being. She is perceived as an evil or threatening force as a result of the young man's refusal to acknowledge that dark, chaotic part of himself. It is interesting that Steinbeck noted the same internal contradiction in Ed Ricketts. In his essay about Ed Ricketts, he stated, "I have said that his mind had no horizons, but that is untrue. He forbade his mind to think of metaphysical or extraphysical matters, and his mind refused to obey him." Dr. Phillips' movement from rational calm to illogical terror is understandable. Far from being a Freudian contest between two distinct individuals, culminating in the young man's seduction, the story can rather be seen as the psychic rebellion of the doctor's unconscious. His terror comes from his refusal to accept the reality of the unknowable and the unexplainable. Steinbeck's revision of the story ends forcefully, indicating its mythic basis. In the manuscript, when the doctor tries to comb out his thoughts after the woman had gone, he sarcastically contemplates prayer. He thought of his life and grinned. "Mother Biology, save me from this evil," he said. "Holy Science, protect me." The satirical tone of this passage demonstrates an attempt to dismiss the intrusion of the mythic as a bizarre joke. Steinbeck deleted this passage from his final text because it was inconsistent with the dark tone of the story. In the published work, Dr. Phillips is unable to dismiss the poetic reality through either logic or ridicule, and remains terrified and baffled by this strange encounter. This story is surely one of Steinbeck's darkest. Several clues as to the source of this dark tone becomes apparent in the journal entry prior to the snake. One is his fear that he will fail in his goal to become a serious writer. He writes, "I work hard enough, but nothing happens. When Carol works, something happens. I seem to be a bad son, a bad brother, and a bad husband, and a bad citizen, all for the sake of being a good writer. If I should turn out to be a bad writer, then it's complete and I will have nothing to fall back on. It's a gamble, not only of my life, but of the lives of everyone with whom I come in contact. I wish I knew. I wish I knew. Fear of failure is a recurring theme in many of his journal entries. However, before writing The Snake, Steinbeck pondered another, deeper, more elementary fear. This centers on an unspecified event or incident in his life. He writes, "A mounting pile of sorrows outside the door. If I opened the door, the sorrow would come piling in like a night snowdrift. Oh, falling house crumbling away rotting. We believe fervently that the event has run its cycle and has come back to nothing, and that when the event is gone, that will be done, and we do not want it to start again. We know that by taking this course, we will build loneliness in the future against ourselves. But we have seen loneliness among those who should be able to dissipate it and cannot, and the last kind seems to be the worst. We know that when we grow old, we shall be grieved by a lasting loneliness, that we will have substituted nothing of value to ourselves, but at least we will not have provided new instruments to bitterness and to loneliness. Perhaps it is selfishness, but how can one be selfish towards the unborn?" This passage reveals Steinbeck's profound fear of loneliness, both in the present and the future. He refers to bitter old age when he and Carol will be grieved by a lasting loneliness, the result of taking this course that would be substitute nothing of value to ourselves. What precisely Steinbeck is talking about here is a matter of speculation. His final question, how can one be selfish toward the unborn, is compelling. He often spoke of his stories as his children. Could he be lamenting stories that would never find life publication? Or perhaps does he refer to the abortion of an actual unborn child? The question is open. In the dark tone of these notes, however, we see the darkness of The Snake, a story he planned to write, quote, slowly out of my unconscious. Clearly, for John Steinbeck, The Snake is a damnable story. He did not want to write it, but he felt compelled. In the journal entry, written immediately before he began composing The Snake, Steinbeck wrestles with these personal demons: fear of failure, feelings of inadequacy to make good on his passion to become a successful writer, and perhaps a deeper sense of personal anxiety, loneliness, and loss. Characteristically, he uses his writer's tool, metaphor and imagery, to work through this gloom. In his notes before The Snake, he writes, "The mind plays and the gulls are sweeping off the sky, and I wish I knew. Last night the sky was clear and the story was deep buried in the sky. I was lonelier than I've ever been. Sky over ocean is so black. It isn't when you're out on the ocean, not nearly so. Then you feel a rhythm with the sky." Steinbeck identifies his fear with the blackness of the sky over the ocean, perhaps representing separation and loneliness. But fear is powerful only when not confronted. When he's on the ocean, he again feels connected, and his fear is replaced by a sense of acceptance and oneness with a rhythm of the sky. This is the way out of the darkness. Steinbeck, unlike Dr. Phillips, finds in his sheer force of will to connect a way to write his way out of lethargy and fear. The silence is very wearying on the soul. I just have to break this deadlock with a hammer effect. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. Thank you.